scar do you hide because the story behind it hurts too much? There's a pale scar just below my ribs, shaped like a crooked splash. At first glance, it doesn't look like much. Just a faded mark you'd probably miss unless I was wearing a swimsuit or my shirt rode up at the wrong time. To strangers, it looks ordinary, but to me, it's a reminder of a night that split my life in two. The night when I realized childhood doesn't politely knock before it leaves. It just slams the door shut. I was 16, and by then, I already carried more weight than most kids my age. My dad had been gone for years, and my mom worked 2 jobs just to keep the bills paid. She was exhausted all the time. Her eyes always shadowed, her voice thinner than I remembered from when I was little. That left me in charge of a lot of things. Dinners, laundry, helping my little brother with homework. People used to joke that I was the little adult of the family, and I'd laugh. But deep down, I wished just once I could be carefree the way kids were supposed to be. That summer night was suffocating. The air was so heavy with heat, it felt like you were breathing through a wet towel. The fan in our kitchen rattled lazily, buzzing like it was as tired as my mom. My brother was at the table, coloring superheroes into bright blues and reds, humming a little tune that was slightly off-key. That sound, so innocent and small, made me smile even while sweat dripped down my neck. Dinner was my job that night, like always. I chose spaghetti. Easy, cheap, something I'd cooked so many times it felt automatic. I remember stirring the pot, the smell of tomato sauce clinging to the humid air, while my brother asked me a dozen questions about which superpower I'd want if I could have one. I teased him, saying I'd pick invisibility so I could sneak into his room and steal his candy stash. He gasped dramatically and promised he'd hide it better. It was ordinary, too ordinary in fact, because when the moment shifted, it felt like being yanked out of a dream. I was draining the pasta, hands slick from sweat, when the pot handle slipped. It happened fast, so fast it felt like time fractured. The boiling water poured out, cascading over my side. The searing pain was immediate, white hot, stealing the air from my lungs. I screamed, dropping the pot with a crash that sent noodles scattering across the floor like worms. My knees buckled. I hit the counter, then the tile, curled around myself in agony. My brother's chair scraped back so hard it nearly toppled. He stood frozen for a second, then rushed to me, his coloring book forgotten. "What do I do?" he sobbed, his voice breaking. "Tell me what to do." And that was the worst part. I couldn't answer him. My throat was strangled by pain. All I could do was writhe, biting down on a cry that tore out anyway. He was looking at me like I was his whole world, like I was supposed to have the answers, and I had none. The minutes between that and my mom's arrival felt endless. I think he ran to the window when he heard her car, waving his arms frantically. When she burst inside, her face went pale, then tight. She didn't panic, not outwardly, but her hands shook as she tried to help me up, her voice a low, rushed chant. "Hold on, baby. Hold on. You're going to be okay." She threw us into the car, didn't even shut the door all the way, and drove like she was outrunning death itself. I was pressed against the seat, sobbing, while my brother kept whispering, I'm sorry," over and over like he thought it was his fault somehow. At the hospital, the bright lights and the cold smell of antiseptic made everything feel unreal. Nurses hurried. Doctors asked questions, but all I could think about was my mom's trembling hand gripping mine like she was afraid if she let go, I'd disappear. The burns weren't life-threatening, but they scarred me, both outside and inside. The wound healed, but the memory didn't. Now years later, when I catch sight of that pale, crooked mark in the mirror, I don't just see burned skin. I see a 16-year-old who was carrying too much, who wanted to be strong enough for everyone and wasn't. I see my brother's wide, tear-filled eyes, begging me for instructions I couldn't give. I see my mom, terrified but forcing herself to stay composed because there was no one else to fall back on. That scar isn't just flesh, it's responsibility, carved into me. It's the reminder that while other kids my age were worried about who liked who at school or studying for their driver's test, I was standing in a sweltering kitchen, trying to keep my family afloat, and one mistake, one slip of a sweaty hand, was enough to remind me how fragile everything was. That's why when people ask, I never tell the truth. I just smile and say, it was an accident. Because if I tell the whole story, I have to relive that helplessness, that moment of realizing childhood had already ended for me without warning. It wasn't just an accident. It was the night I learned silence can echo louder than words. The silence of not being able to answer my brother. The silence of my mom swallowing her fear. The silence I now keep when people ask. It's a scar I don't talk about, not because it's ugly, but because the story behind it still burns far deeper than my skin ever did.